Hey, how's it? I'm Dan, and welcome to Adventurecast. Now, right off the bat, I want to make clear that I don't at all, by any means, to come across as I am like glorifying or saying that any of this stuff I'm about to talk about was an actual like adventure. I'm not by any means trying to minimize or not recognize the immense and horrific tragedies and repercussions that came out of these events. It's just that I've offhandedly mentioned having lived in New York during 9/11 a couple times on a couple recent videos. And at least for my part, it just feels weird talking about those things and having had those experiences and not giving it a little bit more context. And by no means was I ever at any point in, as far as I know, any direct or serious danger. So I'm not purporting this to be some kind of like, whoa, I survived these disasters, because a lot of people didn't. And those are the people that should be recognized and remembered for having suffered these things along with their family and friends and countless other people that are part of that ripple effect. However, the whole point of my channel and my content is just about relaying my experiences, putting that stuff out there, connecting with other people who've had maybe similar experiences or can relate. I know that when I go to the web and I go to YouTube and social media and podcasts and all the other stuff, that's often what I'm looking for. So to include this on my Adventurecast podcast, I know that might be a bit of a misnomer, but it felt more appropriate than any of the other branches of things that I do. So I'm going to talk about three global events, disasters, tragedies that happened that I was physically present for, and I'm just going to be relaying my experiences and my memory of what it was like for me to be there during the time of these things. Everybody has their story of where were you when, living in New York during 9/11, and the two tsunamis that happened about a year apart in the Pacific in 2010 and 2011. And what I'm about to talk about may not seem worthy of making a video, a podcast, and putting it out there, because it's not as like newsworthy or sensational or on the ground eyewitness account kind of content. But like I said, this is just part of my life. My content is about my experiences in my life and my perspective. I mentioned 9/11 a couple times, so I thought maybe going a little deeper into that would be the right time. And I also realized on a video I made a while ago about my life and experiences living on Maui, somehow I totally neglected to include the tsunami experiences, which were huge parts of my time there. And I'll post a couple relevant pictures on my Instagram about this, but at the time I wasn't really thinking about capturing the moment, so I don't have much to show. So to help visualize this a little bit more, I thought I would go into VR and search around an app called Wander, which uses Google Earth Street View. So for some reason, the first part of what I thought I was recording didn't record on the VR. So I'm going to supplement with just computer-based Google Earth to make up for that. And then you'll see it switch and you'll hear an audio change because I'm going from room mic to VR headset mic once the Quest 2 decided to capture my footage correctly. But since I already had the room mic audio, I decided to not go back and redo the VR side. So my son has these controller extenders for Gorilla Tag. I guess so his arm's gonna be longer. All right, but before we head to New York, we got to go back for a second for a little context. This is the cul-de-sac that I grew up on in Pasadena, Maryland, in South Baltimore for middle and high school. And during that time, I learned to idealize New York because of, growing up in a pretty average blue-collar burbs. I yearned for the big city and all the excitement and kinetic of it. So I had my sights set on living in New York because of all the TV and movies that idealized it and glorified it into being this, mecca of everything. It's where I felt I needed to be. So I applied to a few schools, and I think the first one I got into was Long Island University, but I really wanted to live in Manhattan because, it's Manhattan. So I applied and got into Hunter College. So this is where I did a semester, but what I needed to do, of course, was have a place to live. And this was a commuter school. They might have had a small amount of dorms, but I wasn't going to live in the dorms. I wanted to live a full New York life. I want to live in an apartment. But could you live in an apartment in the Mid-East Side? Not from where I come from. So I found a place, of course, through a connection. My dad is a lifelong classical French hornist professionally, and he knew people that knew some younger people that were living in New York in the Upper West Side. So if I remember correctly, the place that I got a room in with 2 jazz musicians that were 10 years older than me, and they called me the kid because, you know, to them I was, and I was. I'm pretty sure it was on 182nd and Broadway, just north of Washington Heights. So if you've seen the In the Heights movie, but you've never been to New York, it's in that same area. It was just in one of these smaller high-rises. We were on the 4th floor, and it was a stifling hot summer, and I had gotten spoiled. Even though we didn't have central air when I lived in Buffalo for my elementary school years, we did have central air all my time in Maryland, so moving to New York, they didn't have that, at least not in the kind of buildings that I could afford, and it was so hot, and I remember just having a big box fan in the window at all times and sitting right next to it, you know. I'd have to like turn my TV up all the way just so I could hear it over the box fan. I moved to New York in August. It might have been actually like somewhere around August 11th, because I remember it being almost exactly a month before 9/11 happened. And just a few weeks into school, as a young, 18-year-old suburban kid just getting used to the big city, I was on my way out the door to go to class, and the phone rang. This is 2001. We just had landlines at the time. I wouldn't be getting my first cell phone for another few years, actually. And it was so early that I was like, oh, this is weird, because my roommates, being jazz musicians, they were often out, as they were on this particular morning, been out all night playing gigs, and they would, sleep into late morning, afternoon the next day. So they were asleep, and I was like, nobody's calling me, nobody knows me here, I just got here. So I go answer the phone, and it was a friend of my roommate Sonny's, who said, hey, is Sonny awake? And I said, no, he was out all night, he was asleep. It's like, well, go wake him up. A plane just hit the World Trade Center. And I was like, oh, you mean like by accident, a commuter plane? He's like, no, on purpose. It's an attack. You need to go wake him up. So I woke up my roommates, and we just spent the next day, like most of the country and a lot of the world did, just sitting in front of the television. We were musicians and a college student, so we didn't have cable at the time. We just had the old school rabbit ears, local channel news that would fuzz in and out. We'd have to smack it or move just the rabbit ears to get a better signal, and we just watched the news. So when I was woken up, only the first plane had hit, and by the time we were all up and watching, not soon after, the second plane hit. Just like everybody, we watched both towers fall. And like I said earlier, we were way, way uptown, so from where we were, I don't remember being able to see smoke or anything. You couldn't see the skyline from where we were, like up in the 4th floor of an apartment. We were just kind of watching it in a horrified detachment in a way, just like, people that were around the world, not in New York. But also, we were in New York, and there were more immediate ramifications, so we were just kind of, in this unspoken sense of dread and collective kind of terror and anger and all those things. We were just sort of brooding on that stuff together. Nobody really knew what to say. At one point, sometime in the afternoon, even though the subways had shut down, I guess it was because some of my roommates' friends had cars, and they lived, I don't know if they were in the city too or they were in the boroughs, but they made their way to us so we could have even more of a collective gathering and watching the news together. And since we had several more people there, all of which were musicians, some of which brought some of their instruments, somebody had like a saxophone, somebody had a guitar. My roommate Sonny, that I was asked to wake up, was an absolutely mind-blowing drummer with like this tiny little jazz kit. I think he had like 3-piece shells and maybe 2 cymbals, like hi-hats, and like a crash ride. And the stuff he could do, it just blew my mind, and he definitely laid sort of a less is more foundation for my future drumming career. So after a day of just pure like extreme, on the edge emotion, so raw, and we were just run like ragged, like emotionally, if I remember, it was kind of unspoken, just sort of natural. We just started jamming together. I don't know if anybody even suggested it. It was just somebody started playing music and somebody else started joining in. And I am so glad that I had that day because, as a musician too, even though I didn't have my drum set, I had sold it before I moved to New York from Maryland because I knew I would never know where to put it. But I did have my sticks, and I played on an upside down trash can. It was the most welcoming catharsis that I could have had on a day like that. That release was especially welcome because, like millions of people, I felt like I needed to do something. I needed to contribute in a productive way somehow, but there was nothing that I could do. So one thing I did was go down the street and do my laundry at the local laundromat. I remember they were always really nice there. That just felt good to get out of the apartment for a little bit, after towers fell and Pennsylvania and the Pentagon, and there was no new news coming in for a while, and we were just kind of staring bleary-eyed at the fuzzy TV, needed to just do something. But then also on the news, they were talking about giving blood as an option, so I was like, yes, sign me up, I will go give blood right now. And I was going to run out and try, and there was a hospital somewhere in walking distance. The subways were closed down, I didn't have a car. But on the news they said that the blood banks were all full, overflowing with donations. So that was, a wonderful outpouring of support for the victims and people in need, but it was also frustrating feeling the need to help out in some way and just having nothing to do. So getting to play music was a great way to, for us to decompress a little bit and send some positive energy out to such a horrible day. Now, going back to Hunter, the other thing I wanted to touch on about this is another side of this experience for me that was, I would say, as impactful as being there the day that it happened was the aftermath. So the first thing is that coming to New York, having not been from New York, I definitely did feel like an outsider when I first got there. I'm like this suburban kid all by himself. I never lived in the big city. I mean, I'd been to New York and visited with my dad and his friends and stuff like that. We saw the sights, we go to Times Square and all that kind of stuff. But, it was in a city of, 8 million at the time. I was brand new, and all I knew was what I had seen on TV and movies, and I was just trying to fit in and get acclimated and make my way. And I just didn't feel like a New Yorker. I felt like an outsider. And unfortunate as it is, these kind of experiences, collective tragedies, can kind of bring people together. And it definitely made me feel more connected to the city than I had. So when I decided to leave a few months later to move to Philly to continue college there, a lot of people just assumed it was because of 9/11, but it was actually just because I found a better program for what I wanted to do, which was screenwriting, and I already had friends in Philly, so it made more sense for me at the time to be there, and instead of being all alone in a program that wasn't exactly what I realized that I was looking for. But on that collective communal front, there's a few memories that I think are always going to be with me. One of those is about the whole, the days that followed the attacks. The first one being the morning that we went back to school. I met up with a classmate of mine at a local nearby Starbucks to grab coffee or tea or something before going to class. And if I remember correctly, she was from Yugoslavia, I think. Her name was Tiana. And I just remember that because I knew a Tivana later, and I would get their names confused in my head. So I had to, and she had a very thick accent. She was very sweet, but also very real. And, as we were talking about it, that was like my first outside conversation than just with my roommates and their friends. I'll never forget what she told me, because I was just kind of questioning everything. Like, how could this happen? What's going on? This is crazy. Then I just remember she relayed her experience about her parents, immigrating from a part of the world that was former Soviet Union and growing up in a part of the world that has had a lot more experience, especially, more recently with this kind of unrest, with these kind of issues happening, right outside your front door. And that was then echoed later. I think it was the same day we went to our English class together, and for the next week at least, no teachers really made it a point to try to teach or do any curriculum or have us do any assignments or anything. People could come to class. I'm pretty sure that people were, allowed to not if they felt they couldn't handle it. And we would just kind of sit there, and if somebody felt compelled to speak, we would talk. Otherwise, it was just kind of like a collective time of mourning and silence and mindfulness, I guess. But I remember there was another girl in our class from Iran. And by the way, Hunter is a commuter school in Manhattan. I've always heard of like the whole melting pot idea, but I never experienced it in the way that I did until going to a school in a big city like this, in this city especially. It was incredibly diverse. And also Hunter, until the 70s, I think, was an all-girls school. So it had a much larger female to male, disproportionate population. It had a huge international enrollment from all around the world. And I met people, from every sector that really helped open my eyes and expand my perspective on things, having grown up in a very average suburban privileged kind of areas and environments. This girl from Iran echoed what Tiana had said. She's like, I'm really sorry for everybody that is going through this for the first time, because I know how horrible and tragic and anxiety ridden and, terrifying it is. But you need to understand, she was talking to, us sheltered, privileged Americans in the room. In Iran, this happens every day. You hear bombs going off in the distance, and you don't know if the next day is going to be you. You learn to live with that. And she's like, this is tragic, but we don't tend to think about how real this is and constant and persistent and current it is in other parts of the world. That just really kind of, made me stop in my tracks and really consider a lot of things. Because otherwise, I would not have thought of that. But then on the flip side, I remember being it was like the only auditorium class that I ever really took. And it was a film class. I think it was like the viewing portion of a film 101 class. So we would have classroom time where we learn about basic, film techniques and such. And then we would go watch movies from film history to have papers to write about and stuff. And I remember, a few days after the attacks, sitting in that big auditorium and people were talking. And I remember, like, this one guy stood up and was like, I'm paraphrasing, but like, evil's at our doorstep, and I never wanted to be a soldier, but if that's what it takes to defend my country, like, sign me up right now. I'll go over there. And, all that kind of rah talk. And like, there's part of me that understood where he was coming from and felt that same angst and anger and wanting to like do something about it. But then I also had those other perspectives of people that were used to this kind of stuff from other parts of the world. And that really helped kind of temper that nationalist fervency that I might have otherwise had I not been exposed to all these various perspectives. Another thing I remember is going to, I'll go back to Hunter, because another thing I remember is being in one of these walkways. There was a girl of most likely Middle Eastern or Asian descent. And I just remember walking by a small crowd of people crowded around a girl who was on the floor, like on her knees, shrieking and crying and saying, I look like one of them. They're going to think I'm one of them. I'm with the attackers or something. She was having like an existential meltdown because of the color of her skin and how she could be perceived in this country. And again, like, I wouldn't have thought of that had I not seen it. And it was really kind of horrifying to see somebody in a place that I had previously felt, relatively safe, even with all this going on, all this madness of the big city. I never felt under like any kind of like direct danger or attack. And it just really made me stop and think about how real that is and has been for people in this country and around the world that are profiled just from the way that they look and are associated with things that they have nothing to do with just because of stuff they can't help. As an 18-year-old, really important foundational kind of young adult stuff that I experienced because of this horrible tragedy. To kind of wrap up this portion of the New York experience, let's go to ground zero. And, I don't think I ever actually went to the trade centers. I went up into Empire and other, like my dad's friends' apartment buildings next to the river and saw fireworks and stuff like that. But I don't think we ever really had any reason to come down here. Like I said before, you can see on my Instagram, I took some pictures from the top of Empire State of this side of the city with a month before the trade centers came down, which is still kind of just really haunting. Like none of us, I had no idea what was going to happen a month later. But one thing I want to mention is part of this whole experience was in the days and months that followed while I was continuing, like the rest of us, to try to pick up and continue living life. I was going to school, trying to get back to some sense of normalcy, was really difficult. And this is the thing that I think, even though I wasn't geographically or physically close to where the attacks happened, I wasn't in direct danger there. The reality of it was not lost on me, not just because of the experiences and perspectives of other people that I went to school with, but also every day getting on the subway, especially because I had to take a train from where I lived. I had to take, I think it was the 1 or 9, because I was on the west side, the upper west side. I had to take it down and then cross over wherever Times Square is. I would either take a bus, a midtown bus, or there was like one midtown train at the time that would cross over, and then I'd have to go back up to the mid-east side to where school was. That took about an hour and a half every day one way, especially in the more populated, crowded, tourists and heavily trafficked areas of the public transportation. Above ground and in the subway stations, there were all these pillars and giant kind of boards erected with missing persons and tributes and stuff like that, like faces of victims and people that were still missing, flowers, candles, so many, like, have you seen, last seen on kind of flyers up, and that was there every day. We're all going about our business, going to school and work and whatever, but we're seeing not just the faces of the people that lost their lives that day, but watching other people, especially, New Yorkers, a lot of them probably lifetime New Yorkers, maybe people that even had put somebody's face up there. I don't know. Just looking around and watching other people as they took in these sights of all that. It was just continually just heartbreaking and enraging and, all the things that made it so real. And lastly, my last like big memory that I wanted to touch on was I used to take the Staten Island ferry a good amount because I knew some guys from school that lived on Staten Island, and I would go visit them. We'd play music because some of them were musicians and they knew I was a drummer, and I had taken the ferry before the attacks and then taking them after. You would go out, and then looking back at the city, at the time, they had these huge spotlights where the towers had been. And that was just another thing, just like the pictures of the missing people and everything was just this in-your-face reminder. It was just living in this city at the time. It was just not something you could turn your attention off to. It was always there in front of you. And it was just very sobering and real and raw. That was my experience, for what it's worth. All right, then almost a decade later, after I had finished undergrad and then gone through grad school, I moved to the Hawaiian island of Maui. But that would not have happened without somebody that you hear me talk a lot about in my content, because he helps create some of it, is my friend Jeremiah, that I met at a school called Chelsea School that we were both working at in Silver Spring, Maryland. I was there from 2007 to 2009. So the school's not there anymore. They've moved to Prince George County, where I think most of their students were coming from anyway. But yeah, this was actually the beginnings of moving to Hawaii, because before this, it never was even on my radar. I didn't even know how many islands there were, what all the names were. I met Jeremiah. His wife at the time had partially grown up on Oahu because her mother was a flight attendant and she flew out of Oahu International for a while. So she always wanted to go back, and she was becoming a Montessori teacher, and so was Jeremiah. So they both found a school and moved out there, and we had been in a band together briefly, as well as we're professionals together, and we were like, hey, let's keep the band going. You know, if I could get a job and move out to the islands, then why not? Because I was just finishing up my master's, I was single, and I was ready to start the adventure of my life. And what a perfect place to do that. So once I got my master's, found a job, moved on out. I was living right here in Kihei on the South Shore. Hello, Kihei. Nice to see you again. Oh, yeah. This is Kalama Park, I believe. Just kind of dumped me here, but... And yeah, this is where I spent summer of 2009 till the summer of 2011. And you can see a lot more about my time here on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/breathingunderwater. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to focus on the big global events that happened while I was here. And the first one was in February of 2010. And I was living here. This was our first house together. I was living with Jeremiah and his family. Yep, right here. This house, we were in the kind of upstairs section. There was also like a downstairs apartment. So this is our lovely little cul-de-sac. Can't really see it from here, but the ocean is right over there, and we would go up on the roof. There was an access, and you could see the sunset over the ocean. We would sit and watch it up there. But right here, it had been the landlord's wood shop, and that's where our band practiced at the time. So we were woken up. I had to have been like 5 or 6 a.m. for these very bizarre sounding alarms that I had never heard before. And Jeremiah comes in and says, grab whatever you need right now. We have to head up country. Up country generally meaning higher ground, but in this case, up country was the word for going up elevation on Haleakala, the extinct, I want to say dormant volcano. I don't think it's extinct. That makes up like 2/3 of the Hawaiian island of Maui, that merged with the West Maui's, and created the Valley Isle. So the reason I just brought up our little wood shop practice space over here was because the thing that we did, and we knew that it was probably a lost cause should the tsunami be bad on our shores. We were just doing what we could, just in case. We just put our like amps and electronics and stuff up on the counters, just in case the water did come ashore, but it wasn't too bad. But we knew what could happen, and we had trainings and things at school about tsunamis. It's funny, growing up on the East Coast, we'd have earthquake and tornado drills, fire drills, and all that kind of stuff. And in addition to fire drills at the school that I taught at in Maui, we also had tsunami drills, which was more of just listen to your teacher's directions so we can get you up elevation as fast as possible. But the alarms went off, and we all piled into. It was me, Jeremiah, his then wife, their maybe 4-year-old, and our roommate, and we all headed up country to one of the most gorgeous places on the planet Earth, which I could say about every corner of this island, but this one really takes a cake. Kula. So we went up to about 6,000 feet because I was so lucky to have had a friend. Through her work, my mom knew somebody that had a sister that lived here in Kula that I connected with, when I moved out here, just to make some early connections with people, get the lay of the land. And she was beyond generous and kind, which just speaks to, not just general generosity of kind-hearted people, but also the aloha and ohana spirit that comes with the culture of these islands. I called her up as we were leaving, and we were just going to, drive up and just sit somewhere like a lot of people did in the car and just wait out whatever was going to happen with the impending tsunami. tsunami. And she was like, no, come on up. And they gave us a place to stay, gave a place to sleep, and cooked us breakfast. I mean, it was just absolutely humblingly generous and sweet of them to allow like a whole nother family, because she had her own children and she lived with her parents in this beautiful kind of dual property that I'm not gonna be able to find on here because I don't know exactly where it was. I don't have the address, but it was like these two houses connected with a walkway, and her parents lived in one, and she and her family lived in another side, and it was overlooking that. Those are the West Maui's over there. We're up here looking over here, but you could see the bay of South Maui, and and out into the Pacific out here. So that's what that view is, and you could see it, pristinely, ideally, gloriously from her balcony. And that's how we spent our day, waiting for the tsunami. And that one was originated from an earthquake in Chile, if I'm not mistaken, and it was absolutely devastating to them. And we were just so lucky, and we all had just so much gratitude that it was a little bit of a scare. It was something I'd never experienced before, obviously, but even with hurricane warnings and small earthquakes and things, I never felt in any kind of direct path of something like I did with this. And we just had no control. There's nothing we could do, especially with our property. All we could do was save ourselves essentially. But we were so lucky that it had very minimal effect, at least on Maui. I know some of the other islands got a little bit of an onshore wave, and there was a lot of shoreline destruction, and boats and piers and such were affected. But like I showed you, our house was completely untouched. We were just very lucky not only to be in that situation, to be affected by the tsunami, but not catastrophically, but also to have somebody generous to take us in and give us a comfortable place to stay for the day. So that was a unique and very scary experience. But little did we know that just a mere year later, the whole thing would happen again. So there was that horrible earthquake and tsunami that hit Japan the hardest in March 2011, and it was so deja vu. Though in that time, I had visitors on the island that were staying with us, so it was a little bit of an extra anxiety, because not only was it our family that needed to vacate quickly, but it was also people from out of town. But they were very gracious. So going back to Kihei, we had moved houses because we found this previously had been a pastor's house connected to the Keolahau Church, and it's nice to see that they still have their vendors out here. We used to get woken up on, I don't know, like Saturday or Sunday mornings. They would be doing a fundraising, selling rotisserie chicken, and it was delicious. We used to go get it all the time. But yeah, they were renting this house, which is right across the street from that. So we couldn't pass that up. And it was such a cool little house too, with like the steepled roof and everything. It had this big, kind of big open, airy feel to it too. And then you could hear the ukulele music coming from their church services on Sunday, and there was always stuff going on like right here, right next door in their community center. And the garage right here was also where our band practiced. So you can see we had these lovely palm trees out front that we put hammock up, and we had this front porch. We could watch the sunset, and in the winter you could see the whales over here. There's the West Maui's over there. This, people called it Sugar Beach, but Sugar Beach was more down that way. This was just like the North Kihei Beach. But yeah, over here, we'd walk right out the front yard and right there, and there's the ocean. Caught a couple waves out here once. There was actually a south swell, which was pretty rare to have any surfable waves like right here. But one day I had just gone for a jog around the neighborhood. I came back, saw some waves, and I was like, surfboard, let's do this. And yeah, so that was unforgettable. But anyway, you can see lots more about all that on my other videos that I've done about my time here. But in this particular case, I just wanted to demonstrate, we were close to the ocean before, but we were several blocks inland. Now, this is where, if a tsunami wave came, there was no avoiding it, and no hope that, like, if a wave came up, that it was going to spare us. So, we grabbed, again, what we could, and we piled in the car, and we headed up country. But this time, a guy that I work with was living in another gorgeous area up here on the North Shore, but it was still higher in elevation. As you can see, it's on the edge of the north side of Haleakala. So we drove up to Haiku, which doesn't have anything to do, apparently, with the Japanese poetry. It's a Hawaiian word. But yeah, he lives somewhere over here. I really have no idea at this point. But you couldn't see the coast from where he was. He was somewhere, in the wooded area, and they had farmland and everything. You can see there's that cattle over there. And this is the North Shore, so you just saw in Kihei it was very arid, and because that is the leeward side of the island. But North Shore is the windward side, so it's very lush and green and rainforesty. And it's just 20 minutes, 30 minutes, if that, to get from here to here, even though you have to go like that because there's no straight shot right there. And again, he was so kind to have us come stay, and this was like the middle of the night when the alarm sounded. We were all just like totally bleary-eyed and sleep deprived, and we heard the alarms, and this time, I knew exactly what was going on, so I was kind of the one to get up and be like, all right, everybody grab, let's go. And I called up my friend Paul, and he was just awesome about letting us stay, and he had like a sort of a little guest ohana, they call it, like a little small side house that they were working on, and they let us sleep in there. And this one, like, they caught it so early that we had a long time to kind of wait and see what was going to happen. But again, we didn't know, they were making predictions and things, but really had no idea what was going to happen on our shores. But we did see what was happening on Japan shores, and it was absolutely horrific. And it was just, we just couldn't believe, what we were seeing happening, unfolding in real time, made worse and more real by the fact that Paul's wife at the time was Japanese, and her family was there. I don't think they were near where the destruction was happening, but so just being there with her too, and seeing the look of just pure terror, just so much empathy and pain going around. And again, it was minimal damage, though I believe that this one was a little bit more severe to the coastline of Hawaii. I heard that, I'm pretty sure that Hilo in the Big Island got it worse. Maybe Kauai did, but Maui, Lahaina, I heard that there was some destruction of piers and things in Lahaina, from what I remember. But again, like, even down here, we were spared. And you can see on my Instagram, I took a picture the morning of when we finally drove back down, when they got the all clear. And you can see the beach was kind of forever altered, and all this stuff washed up on shore, full of sea debris. So we definitely got something, and the beach was a lot smaller and more full of debris than it ever had been in my time there. But that was about the worst that I experienced personally. But I'm grateful in all these cases that things weren't worse. The one big piece of aftermath of these two tsunami experiences, the takeaways for me personally, were the outpouring of check-ins and well wishes that I got from people on social media and text and phone calls and everything. Both times, it was really, really sweet, and it was just nice to know that people were thinking of me and my family and friends, and they were worried and they're just making sure we were okay. I had a friend in Japan at the time. She was in Kyoto, so she was nowhere close to the tsunami destruction over there, but I checked in with her too just to make sure. And it's that kind of stuff that will always give me hope for humanity when it comes to these things that happen that are out of our control, is how people do tend to band together and look out for each other and treat each other with kindness and compassion and empathy, at least more so than not. That's my experience, at least. Ugh, and I know I have VR helmet hair and probably lines all across my face, but that just comes with the territory. I really appreciate you going on this little memory journey with me. And if you have any experiences to relay or perspectives to offer on any of this stuff or your own unique experiences, I always want to hear them. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.